you'll be surprised the number of times that you share something. And a lot of times we are scared or fear sharing that because we think we're the only one. And when you open up, other people are going through it or have gone through it before.
Welcome back, investor, to another episode of the Passive Income Adventures. We have Marcus Long with a long legacy on the show with us today. And Marcus and I really dive deep into the time management of having a family and juggling having a real estate business and a career, transitioning out of a 9 to 5 into being self-employed, and from self-employed transitioning into like passive income retirement, what those years look like, those transition years, because I think that what a lot of people are trying to avoid is getting into another rat race, getting out of what they're doing, looking for more passive income, more time freedom with their family, and then suddenly finding out that they're in a very demanding business and they're putting in more hours than they ever were before. It's looking at yourself, your life, your goals, and being able to very intentionally build that while you're still able to have some income streams to keep the lights on is a recurring theme throughout this interview. And another thing that we touched on that I haven't really talked about with any other guests is Marcus is in an all male mastermind, and which I find intriguing because as a woman, we have a lot of all women masterminds, but I think sometimes the other side of things gets forgotten. So it's a delicate subject that we want to treat carefully, of being able to find similarities with everybody that you're interacting with, but also being able to celebrate the differences and finding between a mixed all male or all female support group and some of the issues that are specific to what he is facing in his world and how that helps him. So that's a really interesting part of the conversation, whether you're a male or a female investor, just trying to figure out what pitfalls and what landmines to avoid. And so jump in for the conversation with Marcus and just hear about what real life looks like as you're chasing passive income adventure. What real life looks like as you're chasing your own passive income adventure. We are live with Marcus Long of A Long Legacy. I love the name of your company. I love when people have a last name or a name that's great, a great play on words. So thank you for being with us today, calling in from Kansas City. Why don't you just start up by telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into your passive income journey, where you are, or how you basically how you made the decision to make a change in your life.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Emma. I look forward to spending some time with your audience and hopefully inspire and share some education. So, yeah, I'm a husband. I'm a father of two. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I spent about a little over 21 years in the military. Recently transitioned out of the military and came back to the Kansas City area. And a lot of my journey is intertwined, my real estate journey and passive income and stuff is intertwined with my military career. And so I enlisted in the Navy right out of high school. A couple weeks out of high school, I was up in Great Lakes at boot camp. And about 3 years later, I was selected for a commissioning program. And they sent me back to the University of Missouri, go Tigers. And that was when I stepped into real estate. And I bought my first 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo there in Columbia. And I had a friend that was moving to town. He ended up renting a room from me. So I started like house hacking before I knew what house hacking was. And when I graduated and got commissioned, I left for Hawaii. That was my next duty station. And I kept that property as a rental. And I actually still own it today. And that's when I was a finance major, right? So I did some of the finance stuff, but that was more like Wall Street and stocks and bonds and whatever, all of that. But with that rental, that's where the wheels started turning a little bit. I was like, oh, that's pretty nice. I had someone paying my mortgage while I was living there. I now have a resident paying my mortgage. And of course, it was new construction when I purchased it, right? So not a lot of repairs and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So it was fairly passive and easy to take care of at the time. But I wasn't super intentional in my early years. I was pretty busy operational. I was riding submarines and ships and deployed a lot. And eventually I had every couple of years, I had an opportunity to pick up a single family property. I bought a cattle farm, most of that being back in rural Missouri, near where my parents lived, where I grew up. And so I had a couple of rentals. Most of the rentals were still new construction, early, didn't take a lot of effort. And around 2016 or so, I started partnering with my brothers. And we were talking about this passive income thing. We're like, hey, I've got a couple of properties. There's some passive income coming from it. And so we partnered up. We started acquiring some more single family properties together. Of course, when we did it, we started buying some older stuff, right? And we put a few $1,000s in it and things. And so what we realized, we acquired a handful of them small little portfolio there, most in our hometown. But a couple things happened that transitioned my mindset a little bit is number one, after a few years of acquiring those together, I think we realized like we were all geographically separated. We were mostly buying near our hometown where we knew we had connections with realtors and bankers and insurance. The one thing they didn't really have is property management, professional property management. So we were doing a lot of that ourselves from long distance. Again, the houses being older a little bit required a lot more. And it was hard to get in contact with contractors and things like that. And we're like, we did this to be passive income. This is anything but passive right now. What we're actually doing, and we all had W-2s, different jobs, right? And so that was one thing that kind of started shifting a little bit. And the other thing is, up to that point, I was doing most stuff like myself or with my brothers. We weren't really networking or connecting with other people that much and talking about real estate. And shortly before my last duty station in England, that's when I started going to some networking events, some meetups, connecting, started having conversations. And then I moved to England. And I was like, oh, bummer. I was really enjoying having these conversations, going to meetups and starting to talk to people about it. And someone I knew in the military, they started a mastermind for active duty and veterans. And so that was a good opportunity for me to kind of start doing that. I joined and continue to connect virtually because now I had to do the virtual thing. Before COVID, I was kind of forced into it a little bit. And by doing so, by joining, I got exposed to different strategies. I started learning about private lending and syndication and a little bit more about short-term rentals. I had an Airbnb a room in my house and different things like that before. But I started, getting exposed to different strategies. And being in England, we also thought we were going to do more European travel as a family during our time over there. And so I started to learn about these passive opportunities. I had some money from selling a house in Colorado, thought we were going to travel. And so that's when I stepped into some of my first passive investments, both through private lending as well as passively investing in some syndications. Of course, then COVID happened, and I was looking at, hey, I'm planning to transition out of the military here in a couple of years, and I really don't want to go into a 9 to 5. So I was looking at how can real estate be that thing for me. Since we were home with COVID anyway, I shifted gears a little bit again and moved over to the active or general partner side of syndications and stuff as well. And then, of course, transitioned out of the military last year, came back to Kansas City, and here we are.
You mentioned that when you were forced into online networking, I know that your partners in England that said the same thing when I first met them, that they were like, well, we got to figure out this online networking thing because we're abroad. And then after the pandemic, they said it actually really helped their business because it wasn't weird anymore that they were trying to come into Zoom calls or inviting people or weird time zones or any of that kind of thing. And I think for me, it changed the trajectory of my business as well because my kids are homeschooled, and so I would try to pretend like that they weren't in the background all these years. Like we had like sign language that they would do if they needed something when I was on a call or recording something. And so after that happened, if they're on a call and I was like, hold on just a second, like, honey, what do you need? And it became like not a big deal to have my kids running around in the background anymore. And so for all those years, I felt like that they were hiding, and now suddenly, yes, we have kids, we have families, we have a life. And so did you find that that was actually a positive turning point in your business when you were living abroad and having your kids around you and all of that kind of thing? What was the impact from that experience?
And 100%. There's a couple aspects to this. I love that you brought up the kids and stuff too. The one thing about the business and not weird to be on a Zoom call and things like that is being 6 hours ahead of the central time zone where most of our portfolio was. So that's where you're talking to brokers or sellers or lenders or whatever. And also, many of my investors are military. About 75% of my investors are military. So there's some in Germany, there's some in Japan, there's some in
Mhm.
every time zone in the US. And so pre COVID, it could be a little bit more difficult sometimes to get somebody, they have all these in person interactions and to take you seriously from hey, you're 6 hours away, or they don't necessarily want to get on the phone or on a Zoom call or whatever that might be. And so I think it definitely gave us a leg up from perspective that, hey, we got to be in the room where we had just as much opportunity to spend time with potential investors,
Mhm.
brokers, sellers, lenders, whoever else as anyone else did. And it became normalized. And so I think certainly from a business perspective, it gave us that opportunity. Also, like talking about being in England, being 6 hours, some people are like, man, you were 6 hours ahead. How do you deal with the time zone thing? In some ways, trying to look at the positives of it. Sure, I was working at night sometimes, but we also had the opportunity to go do my W-2 during the day and then still be able to make some phone calls or hop on some midday meetups, Central Time Zone here in the U.S. Or East Coast, wherever it was, and be a part of that. Whereas it can be challenging if you're trying to start that journey while you have a W-2
Hmm.
CONUS, right? Because by the time you get done with your workday, the banks or lenders or whoever else is closed and done with their day. And so trying to look at like the positive or how we had a leg up from being where we were. And then you mentioned the kids, and I was admittedly the same when it started out too. It's like, shh, daddy's on a call. Go in the other room, be quiet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And same type of thing. And certainly there's things like, hey, when we're recording this podcast and stuff, we still try to keep the noise level down in the background. But if it's just my partners and I meeting, an asset management call or whatever, my partners know my children. So, and they love to see if they run into the camera, like they're waving and things like that. And so the other part too is I don't want to, I think from a human nature and a lot of what is important to me and my family and stuff, I don't want to constantly be like, be quiet. You can't be a child and have fun and play. Daddy's on the call type of thing. And I want them to know like who I'm talking to, why I'm talking to them, the impact I'm trying to have and things. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think it's been a positive thing. I think from a social perspective, I love being in person with the people. It's nice to be back, to be able to shake hands and meet up with people and things. But it certainly over the past couple of years was a blessing in disguise in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's what it's done is it's given us options. Like we can do a Zoom call and it's normalized. You remember when this first happened, people were like, "What's Zoom?" Right? Even though it had been
Yeah,
around for quite a while beforehand. We used to use Google Meet and Zoom for online meetings before that, but at the same time, most people didn't know what it was. But now you have this option; everybody gets it. And so, if you can meet in person, great. If not, whatever, phone call. So I feel like it's really opened up our ability to pick and choose now that we're back to normal and we can meet up in person. It's like what works best in the situation. And I don't find anybody thinking that it's weird the way that they did before. It's opened up a lot of options for us. But you did say something that kind of struck me where when you're coming back from England and where you are right now, and you're like, I didn't want a 9 to 5, but I also always joke like that running your own business is trading in the 40-hour week for the 80-hour week. Instead of a 9 to 5, you have like a 5 to midnight. And so what was it about it that you didn't, you're like, I don't want a 9 to 5, I want to be self-employed? Did you have enough passive income at that point that you felt like you had some runway to be able to build a business? And then how did you avoid, or how are you avoiding like a business taking over your entire life, those 80-hour weeks or whatever? Or is it just like a couple sacrifice years? And then thinking, in my own situation, I think what really benefited my business was that I had a husband who was working a 9 to 5 and he kept the lights on. But I noticed that most real estate investors are the sole, either the sole income earner, or they're making more money and they're trying to do a side hustle because they have a spouse who's like, yeah, that's cute and everything, but I don't want anything to do with it. And so the pressure of having to keep the lights on as well as a side hustle, I think, is what I'm seeing most investors doing when they're starting a real estate business versus just investing the money from their job. And so
yeah.
just recap that question. What was it that you were like, I want to be self-employed, I don't want a 9 to 5? How do you prevent the business from taking over your life? And right now, like you're in this a year now, out of the military, and you have like your pension, your passive income, all that. How are you keeping the lights on, and how are you making it all work from a time management perspective?
Man, there's so much to unpack there, and I love it too. And I think this is like the sometimes the nuts and bolts are pulling back the curtains and stuff on things, but backing up to like why a lot of the reasons I didn't want a 9 to 5, and I've shared this before and stuff. But before I went to England, I was working in Colorado. I was at the aerospace data facility in Colorado, and I'd had operational tours out in Hawaii and San Diego where I'd been deployed a lot once my kids came along. I was still short duty, but I was working a lot of hours, and I came home from work at about 3 o'clock one day. Normally I was gone before the family was awake. I got home around dinner time if I was lucky. And I came home about 3 o'clock one day, and my daughter, who was 3, I think at the time, she said, "Daddy, what are you doing home?" And I said, "I came home to spend the afternoon with you guys." And she said, "But it's still light outside." And it was a gut punch to me, right? And I was at that, I still had a few years left in the military, didn't know if I was going to continue to try to promote and move on. And I think right in that moment, there was no doubt in my mind that I was ready to create an off ramp out of the military. And so not only did that drive that decision to take that direction, it also drove my decision not to want a 9 to 5, right? I wanted to control my time more so than being told the hours I was going to work or when I was going to travel and things like that. And so that drove that decision a lot. I think that you talk about the number of hours that we work, and that's still the case. I'm still putting in a lot of hours now, but the couple years in England, particularly around COVID and things, was were a couple of those hustle years for me, to be honest, even as I was still in the military. I'm glad I started then to try to create a little bit of that buffer. I probably should have started a little bit earlier, to be honest with you. But because we were home a lot during that time, I worked my W 2 a lot during the day. Part of the time I was home for my W 2, but then I was able to work the night. So I did quite a bit of sacrificing because we couldn't travel or do other things and we were home, a lot of late nights and stuff. So there was a lot of sacrifices made during those couple of years in England. And some of that was like daddy being on a call a lot and things of that nature. As we came back here, one of the important parts was to control that schedule and to control my time. And I still put in a lot of hours, but I get to choose like when they are, right? And so just this morning, I had a call. So I do some coaching for a multifamily mastermind. And so one of the people I was coaching, I had a call at 6 a.m., but I can choose to have that time available before my kids are awake, right? And so I've shared some previously, like when I was in England, where I'd try to be doing a call. I'd be trying to do some work before my W 2 and wake the kids up and tell them to get dressed. I'd go back to the work. I'd come back. They're not dressed. I'm upset. They're upset. And the morning was chaos and a disaster. So that's one of the things now on my calendar. There's an hour that's blocked off from like when I wake my kids up, just getting them, they can get themselves dressed, but just having that morning routine with them, making them breakfast, making them their lunch for the day. I'm not doing any work. That is time I get to spend with them. I might take them to school. My wife might take them to school, whatever, but being able to control that. And then I come back and I try to schedule my calls. If I'm going to do a podcast, I'm having calls with investors, our asset management calls, all that kind of stuff. I do as much of that stuff during the day while my kids are at school, right? While they're out of the house. And that way, when they come home at the end of the day, I can, if they're out playing down the street with friends, I can still work on a few things or whatever. But if they come in and say, "Hey, Daddy, we want to play ball in the backyard," the answer is yes, right? I don't have a call scheduled. I don't have anything that I have to do. I can spend the time with them. And last year, I went in and read books to my son's library class. And like next week, I'm going in to work in the lunchroom at school and stuff like that, right? And so I still put in a lot of hours, but I get to choose most of the time when those hours are.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I didn't really think about it quite like that before because my kids are a little bit older. And so they're not coming in with urgent demands most of the time, unless, I mean, sometimes there's a crisis. Someone comes in and the teenager is bawling, and I'm like, oh, better stop what I'm doing and deal with this. But as far as like the urgent things that little kids have, like we're kind of past those days. I feel like I have a lot of control over my schedule, more like an A day, B day. Like Tuesdays are pretty slammed.
Mhm.
So people just know we're not going to do anything on Tuesdays unless dad's going to do it, type of thing. And then I might have Fridays where I never really have much going on Fridays. You guys want to go do something fun, or you want to hang out here or whatever. And so I feel like having the schedule flexibility, I don't always have control over my schedule, but there are enough pockets that nothing's going on that I can either work to do some of those projects, the ones you're always putting off
Mhm.
that need to get done, the preparation type of projects. But at the same time, it's like I have a lot of freedom to be able to go spend time with the kids if they need it. And but if they're good, like you said, if they're off doing their own thing, then I can do some of those prep projects. And so I think it takes a lot of being able to build in your own structure, because when you're that flexible, how do you get things done? Like, how do you make yourself
Yeah.
do things when you don't have to be working?
Yeah.
Not even necessarily for the money, but you're like, oh, I'll do it later. Like, how do you avoid that procrastination?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I 100% agree on that. And I do the same thing too. It's where I typically try to keep my calendar clean and open on Fridays. And that way, if I get to that and nothing comes up, hey, I can do some work or whatever. However, like
Mhm.
last Friday, I went to brunch with my wife and sister-in-law and stuff like that. So you can keep that open a little bit. But it's certainly, when we talk about like financial freedom or whatever this kind of stuff is, retirement things, you're like, oh, I can't wait to have the freedom to get to choose every morning. But you also have to choose every morning, right?
Yeah.
And so you can very easily be 3, 4, 5 days in, and you're like, can keep procrastinating doing stuff. And so I think you certainly have to start to build some kind of structure and discipline to be able to continue to make that forward progress. And that's why I try to have, like, as you said, certain days where I try to put time on my calendar where investors can make schedule phone calls, pockets where I'm going to be doing certain things. And, but I also can control a little bit, like, hey, something came up with my family or whatever. I can adjust or control some of those meetings
Mhm.
and things like that. And the other part of the, calendar control thing too is I spent 2 decades having to ask the military if I could take a few days off to travel somewhere and things like that. And so part of that also now is, hey, if we want to go on a trip during the summer when the kids are off for 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever, I can still do quite a bit of my work from a computer, from a phone. I did that from England for years, right? And so I don't have to ask permission to go somewhere or do something. I can go up and leave for a month and pick and choose during that month, like which days I'm working or which days we are going to have some beach time or something.
Partners are a lot more understanding, because they're going on vacation and we're going on vacation or we're doing things. And so it's not like you're having to ask your partners for permission. When things happen, they're like, yeah, go ahead. So anyway, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I came back to in your initial question, you had also asked about the income aspect of it,
Mhm. But
also, and so
everything,
yeah,
yeah.
come back to that and stuff as well. And so I think this is a really important thing, and I've seen it both in my own life and a lot of people that I help coach and work with and stuff. So one thing from us, like personally, as I mentioned earlier, I had some income streams from some single family type stuff, small amounts. And I had passively invested in a few syndications
Mhm.
and stuff in the early part of being in England, which so some of them were at the point where they're starting to produce some distributions and some cash flow. My situation being slightly different, retiring from the military, I have a little bit of a buffer there with my pension that is helpful and stuff as well, which can be a little bit different than someone just trying to leave their W 2 where they may or may not have. So, is that amount enough to survive or live off on? Well, that depends on where you choose to live and the cost of living and things like that. In our case, it helps like offset like housing or a big chunk of your expenses, but not necessarily pay the bills or the experiences and lifestyle that you desire to live. And so that's certainly helpful. One of the things that kind of it wasn't really in our plan. So my wife has been in the military for about 15 years or so, I think 17, maybe 15. And she was active duty for a number of years and she's now was in the reserves as we left England. And I told her, looking at both my pension as well as some of the other income streams that we had created, looking at it as I had shifted to be a general partner, one of the things that we don't appreciate a lot of times is the net worth and the balance sheet is increasing, looking pretty good. The cash flow
Cash flow,
is very seldom there, and
the
that's a lot
dirty
of times
little
you don't
secret
really
of
appreciate.
money.
We don't appreciate that,
Yep.
and so I told her we're going to be fine, but it might be a little bit tighter
Yeah.
for a couple years as we do a couple things, right? And I also I had a couple I have a JV deal on like an 8 unit short term rental and things like that. So I have a few different cash flows there. However, one thing that certainly has helped us in the past year a lot is it was not in the plan or the intention, but when we came back to Kansas City, my wife was offered an opportunity to go back on active duty for 2 years here locally for the Navy and stuff. And so she ended up taking that opportunity to do so. And like I said, that wasn't in our plan as we made the transition. So we are planning not to have that. But when the opportunity came up and was relatively flexible, still like local, not really deploying a lot, military type stuff, a little bit of travel, but pretty minimal. It was a good opportunity for us in our situation and for a couple years to give. I think over the past couple years, I've GP'd about 8 syndications, and or with a couple that we have working on like 8 syndications as well as my passive ones, and it gives some of that a little bit more time to mature and maybe to make some exits and to reinvest some of that capital.
Mhm.
That
So
kind of, and I've seen it also. It's mentioning doing some of the coaching that I do. I've seen a few people where people are leaving their W two, and in some cases, someone's like, "Hey, I have a year reserve or whatever." And the thing about it, it takes a lot of time, right? Like even, and that's why I'm glad I was like starting this process while I was still in the military and stuff. So to learn, to build the relationships with potential partners, with lenders, with brokers, with sellers, to analyze markets, investors, all that kind of stuff, it can take quite a while in the multifamily space to get to where you close a deal. And then as a general partner, as we've alluded to, the passive investors get paid first. And even as a passive investor, depending on the business plan, it could take a while for
mhm.
distributions to start. Partners, depending on the deal, may or may not get distributions throughout the life of the investment and stuff. And so that's one thing I always talk to, like, don't go leaving your W 2 just to, oh, I'm going to do multifamily next week
Yeah.
and think you're going to get paid out real quick. There's a lot of planning and work that has to be to build that runway or that ramp.
Yeah, my small properties, my singles, doubles, triple, that's what's keeping the lights on since my husband, left his W-2. And I'm a multifamily syndicator, and that's what I'm known for. And we have the balance sheet and net worth. We're paper millionaires type of thing. But the cash flow is something that a lot of people are not talking about. The income itself, I think, is in my opinion, it's been more difficult because leaders get paid last when you're in the GP and capital call first, right? So we're always putting more money in so that we're basically not taking a capital call from our limited partners. And if there is a capital call from the limited partners, it dilutes the GPs even more because there's more money in the deal and that. So it's I saw not one I'm involved in, but a friend of mine, they did a capital call because things are rough on some projects right now. And they went from having something like 20% of the project down to less than 5% of the project. And they're
Right.
working
Yeah.
even harder because it's a challenging project. And so it feels like leaders eat last and people are like, oh, well, I've been a limited partner for a while, but I really want to get into the GP side so I can generate more passive income and spend more time with my family. I'm like, it's not, like you said, it's anything but passive. And I think that
Yeah.
multifamily or large commercial real estate, it takes longer to start paying. And I really want to communicate this because it does take a lot of planning. I think that the is eventually bigger and it can be even more passive in the
Yeah.
long run because you really don't ever have a house that needs a roof replaced. That's always somebody else's problem. But being in the GP side is tough. And I tell people if you want to be in the GP side because you want more passive income, you want to be in the GP side because you think it's going to generate income faster so you can retire, like maybe you shouldn't be managing these properties. Maybe you shouldn't be managing investor capital because you got one foot out the door already in your mind. And unless you want to go in and you want to start a business and you want to have this be like a lifestyle, any GP who's like, yeah, I'm generating passive income and I'm going to retire, I think, well, are your partners retiring? Are you running this as a serious business? How are you feeling about investor capital? Because it's easy to procrastinate. They stop wanting all these meetings are annoying. Like, you see what I'm saying? And so I feel like understanding that being on the active side is active. It's called active investing for a reason. It's a business. I don't even know why they say active investing. It's a business. So when we're talking about passive investing, what advice can you give to listeners who are looking to generate passive income? The name of the show is Passive Income Adventures. It's not how to start a business adventures. There are plenty of podcasts that talk about that. So, what advice can you give to people who are really after the passive income side, whether they're going to retire in a year because they hate their job, or they're like, I like my job, but I don't want to do till I'm 65? What best advice can you give to people who are along that road, maybe a little bit behind where you are?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there is one, just in general, when I hear people talking about getting into it, whether they're thinking about passive or like, oh, I'd eventually like to do what you're doing and stuff like that. Like, I just try to be transparent, kind of like we are here today about some of these things and share with them and encourage them to think about. And just real estate in general, there's a bunch of different strategies. And sometimes we talk about like, oh, flipping and wholesaling and like, that's to me not investing. That's like a job in
Um,
itself. It's like full-time, whatever type of thing. And so and there's a place for it, like if that's what you want to do. But
mhm,
so I just try to share with people like, hey, the spectrum of things along passive to active and different pros and cons. But people have to look at themselves. Like, just because I'm doing something doesn't make it right for you.
mhm,
What is your desire? What's your end goal for you, for your family? And which of these align best to support that, right? And so I think a lot of times when many people we talk to with real estate are looking for the passive income. They come to me and ask me like, "Oh, I want to do what you're doing." I was like, "Well, what I'm doing is not passive. Like, I work in this every single day, right?" And so I think there's a lot of different reasons. Whether there's some people that like love their W-2, as you said, want to do that, but maybe they want exposure to real estate. Or many of my investors, being military, I spent a couple decades, so a lot of my network and peers kind of put money. You don't think of military as having necessarily a lot of money and stuff, but many of mine have put money in the stock market or whatever, stocked it away for close to 2 decades. And now when they see those like the volatility of the ups and downs, it's like, oh, that's a bigger chunk than I used to see going up
mhm,
or down. And so they want to diversify. They want some exposure to real estate, able to provide that. But they like maybe they still are really enjoying their military career, or perhaps they want to get a contract job, afterwards, DoD or something like that. They're not interested necessarily in being active in real estate, but they want the exposure and the benefits to it. And I think one thing is when I look back, I said, I wish I would have started earlier. And part of that is probably even like on the passive side, I wish I would have started earlier, like earlier on in my military career.
yes.
Even as we said, like GPs don't get paid for a long time. from a passive perspective, you can start creating some cash flow, but it's really the time in the market that
Mhm.
allows that to kind of amplify, right? And if I was like, man, if I could have been, I don't want to say smarter about decisions, but maybe more educated or informed a little bit earlier, I probably could have got into the market as a passive investor and stuff and let some of that like compound a bit and be in a better position as you try
Mm.
to make this transition out, right? And so I think a lot of times we wait too long. We wait until we're ready to make the transition,
Yeah.
and then we start, right?
Yeah.
We're like, oh, I want to start passively investing now. It's like, well, we should have been doing that 5 years ago or whenever, so that that can start flowing, and that
Mhm.
the income streams are there, ready as we are ready to make that transition.
Yeah, that's really gold because I think what you are hitting on is that not everybody's cut out to do everything. This isn't a good fit for everybody. But at the same time, like really understanding yourself, understanding your goals, and being able to look at various options and pick one that is going to be a good fit for you, the time that you want to put in. I talked to some people on the show where they are wealthy and working because they love it and you can hear it in their voice and the excitement and they're like, oh, I've never done anything that's quite like this before, and they want to tell everybody about it because that's just how they are. And I have other people who just cannot wait to retire, and it's not that they want to sit on a beach in Mexico. I think the beach Mai Tai thing is a complete myth because most people who are going to hustle and be long-term planners the way that investors tend to be, I get really bored on a beach really
Yeah,
fast. They're looking to give back, they're looking to help people, but understanding like what does that lifestyle look like realistically, and matching it up and being able to say like, okay, this is for me, this isn't for me. I think as basic as that sounds, it's the missing piece for a lot of people. And so I let's use that as kind of a segue to how you're going through that process again and looking forward to your future, because you're building this business, a syndication business. You're trying to juggle things, balance it all. You've got the cushion of the pension and your wife's income to be able to do what you're doing. What kind of a process are you going through right now on your self introspection to say, where am I going from here? What do I want out of life? How do I make sure that I'm more intentional about the way that I'm crafting the life that I want?
yeah, I think that's powerful in a couple ways. So in even in the real estate specific area, and I look at as being a general partner, and my partnerships that has come into play over the past couple of years. And we talk about the passive investors and the general partner is like, hey, not everyone really wants or is interested in some of the things as being a general partner. And so one of the things I realized is as I started to partner with others is I did my first deal and stuff, and then my first mental thing was like, hey, I'm going to do better. Like I'm gonna be a better underwriter. I'm gonna be a better asset manager because I want a larger piece of the pie, right? I want a
Mhm.
bigger chunk of the general partnership. And then what I realized is that a couple things. Number one, I have partners that are really good at some of these other things,
Mhm.
right? Like I was a finance major, so like the spreadsheet doesn't scare me away, but I also don't necessarily want to gather the data and underwrite 100 properties, right? And
Mhm.
so part of the process was understanding like how do I actually want to spend my time? What are my interests or the skill sets and what I can lean into and be really good? How can I be a great partner? And like how can I leverage my partners and what they're really good at to do that? And so I think amongst our team, we've had a kind of a core team that's worked together on a number of deals, and we're starting to be very good at that. And what I realized, hey, I would rather focus on a smaller part of what I enjoy doing and what I'm good at and have a smaller piece of the pie. So I think that's one thing that I learned from a personal perspective and how I want to craft my lifestyle. I think another thing for me personally is about 18 months ago, separately from real estate, is that I joined a mastermind for men, the
Mhm.
Kinetic Man mastermind, and it is filled with other successful entrepreneurs, business people. Many have military backgrounds because of the network initially, not all. Some of them now are Chick-fil-A operators and different things like that.
Mhm.
They're all successful guys with various challenges, right? And so one of our kind of key things that we talk about is redefining success, right? And I think that a lot of times we grow up in this culture of the salary, or what level do we get to in the corporate world, or things like that being the level of success. And so I think being in this group of men and talking about prioritizing the time with our children, right, and things like that, or various number of things like what is success. And I don't know If you've read the book, The Family Board Meeting,
Mm.
it's a great one. It's a very specific concept, but essentially it says we have 18 summers to build a lasting relationship
Oh, yeah.
with our children, right? So easy read. It talks about one-on-one time with children and stuff. But I think that was also, I read that a couple of years ago and was a powerful thing for me, more than just the one-on-one meetings with the children, but really that broader, we have 18 summers, right? My daughter turned 9 this summer. And I was like, that hit me. I was like, that time's halfway over, right? And so I think that surrounding myself with people that were having these conversations about what is success, what do you prioritize? A lot of times we talk about at work or the things like, I'm doing it for my family, but I'm in front of a computer screen 10 hours a day, whatever it is. That's not what my family wants. My family wants my time. And so I think that just like having people challenge me, sometimes when I say, like, oh, I'm doing it for my family, having those guys like challenge me, why? What do they want? And stuff like has helped me really dig deeper and think more about being intentional about what the decisions, what I say yes to and what I say no to.
Okay. Like you said, there's a lot to unpack there because it sounds simple, like I'm doing this for my family, but you're in front of your computer for 10 hours a day and just being able to listen to those cues. I found that for me, sometimes the biggest turning points come from the biggest challenges, the biggest losses, the biggest, wait a second, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? Have you had anything happen to you recently where you've had to take a step back and just reevaluate and say, is this aligning with the original intention and the original goal of what I was after? Or have I gotten little by little squirreled into something else that you're looking back and just doing that check in every once in a while? What does that look like for you?
So a couple of examples I'd say is like going back into the story a little bit into the past, but it's like some of those things when we bought homes that needed more rehab and stuff than
Yeah.
required. And there were some pivot points along the journey where I said, wait, we were trying to create passive income. And this isn't passive at all. And like the amount of headspace. And in fact, as I got into syndications and stuff, we've offloaded much of our single family portfolio, still have a handful and, taking some of that equity into passive investments on the syndication side. Some of them we ended up breaking even on or took a lot less profit than we had expected. But overall, it was worthwhile because it freed up so much headspace,
Mm,
right? Ultimately, I was just kind of like, there were times I was like, man, I don't want to take a loss on this one, or I don't want to sell it to break even. And I just had to look at it and be like, the headspace it is taking from me right now is not worth, right? So,
yeah.
okay, I'll suck up my pride a little bit and break ties with it so that I can move on in the direction that I know I need to move
Hmm.
on. As we get more into this past year, and I guess even the example I gave you as far as like my role in the general partnership and things like that, there's been these areas where I thought this was the path I wanted to take, and then a few months in, I'm like, oh, pull the reins back a little bit. It's not supporting. And I think we have to do that. And that's one of the reasons like these weekly calls with these men are really valuable for me. Like a lot of times we might go to a conference or we have a motivational weekend or conversation and we think like, oh, I'm going to do X, but then we don't, we drift and get off that path. And so I think that for me to have a group of people that I have continuously checked in and challenged and support me and things like that, it helps you keep from drifting a little bit
Hmm.
because otherwise I think a lot of us do, right? We see, I keep going back to real estate here, but you see other people like, oh, I have 500 units, 1,000 units, 1,500 units. And it's like,
Yep.
someone else, number one, I don't know if they own 5%, 10%, 30%. You don't know. And so, and why? So I have these like people coaching all the time say, oh, I want 500 units, I want 1,000 units. Why? Because it's a
Hmm.
round number that they heard someone else say, right? So you
Yep.
have to peel that onion back a little bit. And some examples, I guess, but I guess that's understanding what we want, what our goals are, and not trying to take action to fulfill someone else's dreams or desires or goals. And
Yeah.
so for me, having people that have surrounded me that kind of keep checking in and challenge me helps me keep from drifting a little bit, I think.
Mm. Oh, okay. So I'm curious, before we wrap up, let's just back up just a little bit and briefly tell me about this mastermind because I spend a lot of time as a woman with other female investors, and we talk a lot about issues that are specific to women investors and
Mhm.
mothers and things like this. And so I know there are several groups out there that are for men only. And honestly, like sitting through the Barbie movie recently and the feminist rant that started, I was like, oh man, more. But by the end of it, I'm like, oh, this is totally, that's how I feel. Like that's what it's like to be a woman, right? And
Mhm.
so, what can you tell us about your mastermind where you're working with other men so that we can better understand what male specific issues have you found that you're dealing with that other men are dealing with that maybe you're having to learn how to overcome, and identifying like, wait a second, yeah, that's exactly how it is, and help us understand from your perspective, especially for our lady listeners, the benefit of being around both diverse groups that are much different than you
Mhm.
and think different and have different experiences, as well as groups that are very similar and learning from one another's similar experiences.
Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of my friends started this mastermind. I was one of the founding members to help, and that was a conversation early on. Was a long term, are we going to invite women in or is it going to be male? And one of the things is we are adamant about being extremely vulnerable and transparent
Mhm.
in there, right? And so ultimately, we thought as men, we would be more likely to be transparent as a men's group,
Mhm.
essentially, right? And we have a kinetic life circle on there. It has things like family, friends, fun, finances, bunch of F's. There's a few other ones as well.
I'm in a
Uh,
mastermind like that with a bunch of F's too.
so we spend like a month. There'll be like a family month, right? And so, and I'll tell you right now, it's not all macho men talk and just like complaining about. The guys will challenge you, right? Like
Mhm.
we are vulnerable and share a challenge that we're having in our marriage or with children or whatever, and you'll be surprised the number of times that you share something, and a lot of times we are scared or fear sharing that because we think we're the only one. And when you open up, other people are going through it or have gone through it before, right? And the guys will say, like, "This is how I worked through that situation," or and like I said, they'll challenge you. They'll have you considered how she feels, how your spouse feels, right? And so it's not always about go get her, anything like that by any means. A lot of times they're asking like, "Hey, don't be upset with her response or her action. What can you do to change your input or your action to create a better situation?"
Yeah, I think when my husband got laid off in 2017, which was what kicked off my entire real estate journey, I was lying in bed. We were just about to go to sleep, and he had gotten a recommendation letter from a woman that was one of the C suite at the company where he was laid off. And she said, oh, he's great, this and that, and all the normal things to say, right? And then she threw something in there that really stuck with me. And she said, he's the sole income provider for 6 children. And I was just like, wait, what? No, I had a little part time something that I was bringing a little income. What is she talking about? I realized like my business, my side hustle couldn't support our family. And I looked at him and I said, this must be a massive burden to you that society says the man should go out and provide, especially with 6 kids, right? It really did interrupt my career a lot for all the babies, right? And I said,
Yeah.
you've got so much pressure on you to provide income for so many people. And I said, I apologize. I just never really thought about it from your perspective before, being a male in our society. I'm sorry I let this happen. I'm sorry that I put you in this position. And I pledge right now I'm going to do something about it. And started this journey basically as a way to hedge a layoff, but realized
Mhm.
very quickly that it had much more power to it than that. And he's since laid off again, left his job, and now he works with me full time. And it's a very different relationship. And he is a very different person now that he doesn't have
Mhm.
to feel like he is a sole income earner. And if he gets laid off or something at somebody else's whim, that the whole ship is going to slowly sink with me being able to plug in little holes with
Mhm.
my tiny side hustle income. And shifting my mindset to his experience in our culture was a powerful turning point moment for me. So that's why I think it's really valuable to for you to be with people who are able to guide you through the ways that our society puts a lot of pressures on different genders in different ways. So I think it's fascinating. I'd love to be a fly on a wall in one of those meetings.
I'm sure. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would. Hey, I mean, we share a lot. Like, there's laughter, there's tears, and although we are similar in the sense that we are males, there's still a lot of like vast
Mhm.
experiences of different business people and different things like that. And I mean, even from my business partners, I find a lot of value in diversity and stuff too. Half of my partners that I work with are women in the general partner stuff, and I think we're just all we need those different pockets of
Mhm.
support groups for different things. I'm 41 as we speak today, and as we grow men and women in different ways, the kids take priority over social things and stuff. And sometimes that's one of the things we talk about in the group is like friends, like how many true deep friends do you have? And there's a lot of societies like, oh yeah, I have my friends, but you know, are they just acquaintances or people you hang out with a little bit, or can you actually have challenging conversations
Yeah.
with them? So yeah, it's been a great support system, and not just support, but that challenged me to stay on track as I go through this transition.
Yeah. Well, I've learned over the years, I feel like we're a lot more similar than we are different, especially me being in a lot of male dominated industries, from like the rugby industry to the real estate industry and in the photography. Like, I feel like the more time I spend with men, the more I realize that people are just people, especially when I'm traveling and I'm living abroad. Like, people are just people. But I also think it's a trap to think that they're and
Mm-hmm.
find that camaraderie. And so I think that's a really good point that you bring up, that the more people we spend time with, it's sometimes we have to specialize in certain things. Like, what I'm getting from this group might be different than what I'm getting from that group. And it's the same way that what I'm getting from my children as a mother is different than what I'm getting from my husband as a wife, or what I'm getting from my
Right.
sister as a sister. Those relationships are all very unique. And so I love that you're able to tap into what you need to, where you need to, and address some of the issues that sometimes get left alone when we're trying to act like everybody's the same. More
Yeah.
similar than different, but the differences do need to be addressed. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. I think that your perspective on time management and on being self-employed and passive income is really interesting, because you're really, I don't want to say at the tail end of your journey, because you have a lot of room to go. And I think that's what keeps people going. But you've made that transition out of the corporate or the W 2 or the 9 to 5 life. And you're figuring out how to make it work from here on out and bringing in multiple streams of income. That's the theme I'm hearing here. You've got multiple streams of income. From some of your things are paying you distributions. Sometimes you sell something and you're able to just keep cobbling together multiple streams of income to keep the whole thing tied together. And I think that's really key for people who want to have passive income, is together multiple sources, that you always have something brewing and something coming. It's most people, they say, well, how do you keep your lights on? I'm like, well, how long do you have to to hear about all the different threads?
Long conversation, isn't it?
Exactly. And sometimes it can be a lot to manage, but I think it's totally worth it, because it allows us so much more freedom than we ever had before. It's a different kind of work, a more satisfying kind of work. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us. Okay, so lastly, how do people get a hold of you? And I always ask, like, why should people get a hold of you? What is it that you would love to have result from the person reaching out to you after this show?
Yeah. So first of all, if someone wants to reach out, they go to the website alonglegacy.com, and there's a calendar if you want to set up a time to talk. You can send me an email. All my social media stuff is there. It's a one-stop shop. And I'll give you a couple people that would be good to reach out to me, and why you might want to do so is, one is, so I have a lot of educators in my family. I have a large family, a lot of them professional educators. I never taught in a school in that way. However, I think some of that was in my genes to do so. And so I love spending time educating, and that's what I've done a lot with many of my investors. And so, if you're thinking like, "Hey, I want to get into this passive income," or if you think you want to be a general partner or an active investor or whatever, even if you're thinking, I want passive income 5 years from now or whatever, reach out today. Start getting educated and
Yes.
understand. Don't wait till that time. Even if you don't have the money to do it today, whatever, start understanding what your options are. And
Yes.
I love having those conversations, understanding people's situations and informing and educating them on, hey, here's a spectrum of different options,
Hmm.
so that they know which direction and route and what they want to head to. So I'd love to talk to people about that if I can dig deeper into the things that we talked about today. Also, my kids are a big part of my journey, the reasons I've made many decisions. And I also am trying to bring them kind of along for the journey a little bit, right? I've taken them down to properties in Tulsa with us so that I can show them, hey, here are the people that we employ. Here are the residents that we provide a home for. I don't want them thinking daddy just sits behind a computer screen. And so we've done some fun, different things in the house to try to build some financial education and literacy there, if you will. So if you have kids and have ideas that you'd like to share or learn from things we've done, I'd love to have that conversation as well.
Nice. Yeah. Just being able to create the plan and starting sooner than you think you need to start. That's great advice, because, like you said, even if you don't have capital to invest right now, looking forward to the time when you do helps you actually get it, planning ahead and
Yeah.
actually get it.
And one thing I always tell people in my network that are say, hey, I think I'd be interested in investing in some of your stuff a couple of years from now. I'm not ready
Mhm.
right now. I always encourage them, number one, to have conversations with us, but also come to some of our webinars and
Yes.
stuff, right? Like to learn more about it. Sometimes people don't want to do that because they think, oh, if I show up, they think I'm interested.
Or it's going to be a hard
Like,
sell.
just, yeah, exactly. And that's not the case. Like, you get to hear, number one, talk about our business plan, the kind of what we do, learn more about it so you can ask questions. You also get to hear questions from other investors, maybe some that have been
Mhm.
doing it for quite a while. And you're like, oh, I didn't even know I should ask that or
Yep.
something, right? And so it's even if you don't think you're ready today, start the education journey today.
Well, it's saying I'm not going to go to college because I have to get a job right this second, knowing something I
Mhm.
should know that I'm going to learn from college. You spend a lot of years educating yourself on how to make money in college, and it takes a couple of years sometimes to create the plan, get to where you need to be going. I see a lot of people who have a pile of cash because they sold a home or they sold a business or they got a
Mhm.
judgment or settlement or something like that. And they have this pile of cash and they're like, I don't know what to do with this pile of cash, and they're feeling a lot of pressure because they know that time is money and compounding and all that. It's easier to figure this out before you have a pile of cash sitting in your hands. I'll just put
Mhm.
it that way.
That's right.
So thank you so much,
100%.
Marcus. Great message. Reach out. You cannot underestimate, just speaking to the listener, you cannot underestimate the power of a good teacher who loves teaching. And then can you share us real quickly if somebody wants to have you be their coach, where do they get a hold of you to book a coaching session?
Yeah, so primarily most of my coaching now is done like through mastermind stuff,
Mhm.
like masterminds that I'm in. I'm coaching
Okay.
specifically for them.
Mm,
However, if you want someone wants to have a conversation to even if it's like a longer term relationship, go to the website alonglegacy.com,
mm.
set up a call on their Calendly. We'll see where they are in their journey, what they're looking for, and we can have a conversation about a future relationship there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Love it. It's definitely where a lot of us are aiming for. And it's always great to have someone who's been there can look back and tell us what it looks like up there. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you so much for listening in with my conversation with Marcus. I love having people all to myself for an hour and just being able to ask them all the questions that sometimes you don't get to when you're just talking about business. It's a great way to get to know people that you want to partner with or you might want to invest with and just being able to learn. And like I said, having somebody who really enjoys teaching, who enjoys putting the message out there, that is powerful because we are spending time doing something that we love and it comes through when we're talking to people who are trying to learn. And the message of start earlier than later was really apt because I feel like some people wait too long to learn about investing because if they don't have huge piles of money to invest, they're waiting until they have more and they're always and there's never and so just saying, "Hey, I'm going to start educating myself because I think that this is important." And so that when I do have cash coming in from something, it's all sorts of different things. It can come in little bits if you're living below your means and sitting on your bonuses or just putting money aside and not quite sure what to do with it. One day you're going to look at the pile and say, oh, I better figure out what to do with this pile. So it's better to figure it out before that happens. And so jump in. We've got webinars and Marcus has webinars. If you go to his website, if you want to jump in on ours, we are at risecapitalinvestments.co. We put on webinars twice a month. And then weekly, we have riseclubcapital.com where we run our club and we're able to just look at deals. If you want to participate in the deals with our club, we're using basically a club structure to do that. And if you don't want to, it is a great way to network and learn by looking at real deals. And I think that's just the best way to do anything is to just get out there and do it and start earlier than you think you need to. Because that dirty little secret of cash flow on commercial real estate, it takes a while for these larger projects to turn around and start paying. And so getting involved earlier rather than later is the best way to go because it's easy to chase yield and high returns. What's a lot more difficult and usually takes a little bit longer is chasing cash flow. And so the sooner you start learning, the sooner you're able to start investing, the sooner you're able to start enjoying that cash flow, and the sooner you're able to say, I wish I had started sooner. So thank you for joining us today. And please reach out after the show. I would love to hear about what you're planning for your next passive income adventure.